Welcome back to Hero Goldberg. Today we'll be talking about a very contentious issue that bubbles up in right of center and also the manosphere style circles. That is women, utilization of welfare, and voting rights. Now, why does this matter? A lot of guys approach the issue from a highly emotional, resentful, butthurt position, and that's fine. Not everyone has to be a policy wonk or bean counter. However, when you begin to propose solutions that are grounded in that rage and irrationality, if you are successful at one point, they could end up being more detrimental for men than the existing model. And it's not to say that reforms are unneeded, so I believe with food stamps, if you are on them and you get pregnant, you shouldn't get more checks for the new kid because you're essentially creating a cycle and bad incentives. At the same time, the American welfare system is not nearly as luxurious or extravagant as you've been made to believe with these chain emails or Sean Hannity said this. A lot of it is just propaganda funded by wealthier interests to protect themselves, because if people were paying attention, I did a video on why CEOs are living on welfare. If you actually look at that stuff, there is the true criminal behavior. Those are the people affecting your livelihood, potentially your 401k, your pension program, the quality of your health care. But you're distracted and they appeal to your moral indignation about, oh, how can this person be living on the government? Well, in reality, and that still happens, but it's not as widespread as people believe. A lot of folks who use the welfare system are actually working full time. They just don't make enough money. There was a really good documentary on Dayton, Ohio, and this gentleman had been a diesel mechanic. The industry completely collapsed in that area. He was working minimum wage and he was applying for benefits because he couldn't pay all his expenses. And that's more common than you might believe. So just to begin with, we'll talk about welfare a little bit more in detail and then go into the voting question. I took the liberty of putting together this blog post a couple months ago to help people understand what exactly the American welfare system entails. A lot of the programs have limitations and restrictions on them, so you may have heard at some points this from Cato or other places. You can get $35,000 a year just from the government doing nothing on welfare, and they've got different figures based upon the state. Now that sounds outrageous, but when you start breaking down these figures, you find that specifically in Wisconsin, where they were doing this study, only about 100 some people qualified for the full $35,000. And just because you qualify doesn't mean you're going to be awarded all of it, let alone for the duration of your natural life. So to give you an example, TANF, Temporary Assistance for Needy Families, is one of the remaining direct cash transfer programs. You have a 5-year lifetime limit that you can be on that model. It's not, oh yeah, I can just get on this and then in perpetuity. That's not how it functions. So how many people who can actually get this and get this for more than a number of years is highly debatable, and that's because reforms have already happened. This was 1996. You had the Welfare Reform Act. Billy Boy Clinton, the era of big government's over. Together with Newt Gingrich, they put this in place. The idea was we're going to end the old welfare model where people just sit around getting government handouts. There's going to be work requirements, limitations. You have to be applying for a job, looking for new work. Now, why is this so significant? So prior to 1996, you had something called the AFTC, and it was generated under LBJ. This was kind of the stereotypically bad direct cash transfer program. This is where you got the whole welfare queen idea, which, mind you, nowadays with all the technology, computers, ID verification, to really scam the welfare system would require a fairly high IQ. It's not like in the old days, everything's paper. You can have multiple identities very simply. To do that in the modern age consistently for a long period of time, you would be smart enough that, frankly, DHS should be hiring you at 6 figures doing cybersecurity because, they don't know what the hell is going on. In any case, what the 96 reform did, they said, we're not going to have people getting government checks. So they significantly restructured and eliminated the base model of the AFTC. What that meant was that the feds were not kicking in as much money directly to, let's say, single mothers. but they politely nudged state and local governments and said, you need to start cracking down on these so-called deadbeat dads and upping their requirements because many of them are not paying their child support or even alimony. And prior to 96, part of it's technology again, but it was easier to not pay all the child support or alimony, just the nature of the system. Because I said, well, at least the government's funding these folks. It's not a big deal. When you turn around and you get to, oh, it's been cut off, now we're going to really be going after these men. And it's no surprise that ever since the late 90s, in part because of the internet, we've had all this, oh, the truth about marriage, I got screwed over, I've been sent to prison over child support. You know, there's an argument to be made that sometimes if you cut off the government funding and you say individuals, private persons, they have to solve their own problems, that could happen. Now, you still have the courts getting involved in a coercive manner, but the underlying idea is that individuals do it, not the government. And again, you see how maybe if that program hadn't been eliminated, maybe they wouldn't be as vigilant on pursuing men and destroying their lives financially. It's up for debate, but that's what some of the analysis points towards. In fact, this was really amusing because just recently, the GOP tweeted this. They're like, oh, 1.5 million U.S. mothers have fallen out of the workforce because of Biden's policies. Basically, they're taking those checks for COVID. And you're like, well, the GOP now opposes women being at home with their kids. It's kind of funny. But yeah, you know, sometimes as though many of us don't oppose welfare, obviously, or socialism, but sometimes if it's there, it might incentivize people to just, okay, I'm going to live this life. I'm not going to be necessarily trying to hound my husband in divorce court. Could still happen, but again, if there isn't the immediate motivation to do so, it might be less probable that it occurs. Up for debate, I get it, but we should at least appreciate that fact. And now we get to this sort of tour de cucking. Oh, women and voting. So the primary argument is that
all these women just vote for welfare and higher taxes and Democrats. Men just want to be individualists and start their own businesses and work hard and deregulate the economy.
And I said, yeah, you know how all those guys get angry because I said that women can't do STEM? It's like, yeah, because the men do STEM. They create all the technology, the math, and the science, and then they create the technology for the dating apps. But the dating apps didn't actually destroy human relationships. That was feminism that came in, and then it's not the men that STEM. Yeah, well, yeah. In any case, this is the primary argument. The men, or women rather, they vote for the left parties. They want the higher taxes, the welfare. Men just vote for lower taxes and deregulation and individualism, I suppose. Now, keep in mind that if you look at the stats, black men still overwhelmingly vote for Democrats. So why are you limiting it to only women not voting? You could just go, you could go ahead and send out every ballot would be checked Republican, and it's like a plebiscite. You either agree or disagree. There's no other party. If you're really so insistent on we can't be voting for someone who wants higher taxes, that's just a possibility. But even if we consider, let's say women vote for Democrats and Democrats finally achieve Medicare for all. Medicare for all is not designed to be only for women. It's for everyone. So you'd probably have higher payroll taxes, but the idea is if you're a dude and you've got some rare medical condition, you're not going to experience a medical bankruptcy in our healthcare system, like there's a good chance you would under the existing model, which is not free of government influence, but it's certainly not all run by the government. Or let's say you have a kid, and it's the same thing. She's got a unique condition. She needs a lot of treatment. You could go bankrupt if you've got crappy health insurance in the United States. The idea is, okay, this is sort of a grander subsidy that will take care of people. And you never know, maybe the fact that people wouldn't be facing these medical bankruptcies might even save some marriages, because there are, in fact, unions that split up, usually over financial problems, and medical bills can be a very big part of that. So it's just worth considering. Now, on the flip side, you vote for Republicans. And don't give me some crap about libertarians or paleocons, because most men are voting Republican Party. They're not voting for this specific true conservative, which doesn't really exist anyway. So what do you get? Well, they're going to trim your taxes a little bit. They're going to deregulate, not like the small business regulations, eliminate your registration fees, eliminate taxes on your property. No, you're going to still be paying that through the nose. They're going to slightly trim your federal income tax just a little bit. And then they're going to deregulate Wall Street, and they're going to send trillions of dollars overseas to the Middle East to support the Republic of Bhutan. You can see it just under Lebanon there. So you end up with socialism either way. The question is, do you want socialism on the home front, which might actually benefit you, the healthcare or university education? I understand that it would inflate the value of a college degree, but at least you would have access to that. You wouldn't get into debt. Or you can send it all to the Middle East. Because politics is about the lesser of two evils in the American model. You're not really getting an authentic, true to principle person. That's not how the system works. So there's a trade-off. Now, if you're very rich, yeah, of course you're going to vote Republican because of the taxes. But if you're like middle class, do you really benefit that much from GOP tax policies? It's debatable. Maybe your 401k does, so we'll give you that. All right, so that one took a little bit to load, but now we get to this whole question of voting and taxation, correct? And let's just start from, well, let's start actually a little earlier on from that. They say the more honest guys will just go, no women vote whatsoever, only men. Okay. I don't agree with that, but I can appreciate the fact that they're not being some Weasley coward trying to beat around the bush. The other ones will say something, well, it'll be on the basis of whether you pay taxes in a net sense. All right. Now let's consider how silly this is in effect. On the federal level, you've got a federal income tax, right? Certain states don't have an income tax. So would that mean that men and women can both not vote on the state level? Would those just be non-binary people that vote? And even if you're poor, the chances are you are paying some form of taxation, consumption taxes, sales tax, maybe gas tax. If you own no property but you rent a small apartment, part of your rent is property tax. It's not like the landlord's just out of the goodness of his heart paying your property tax. It's going into your bills. There are taxes on utilities. There are taxes on if you have a cell phone. So that's already creating a problem. Now you've got a young person, he's working retail, he doesn't make enough, so he's not a net taxpayer. He doesn't get a tax, or he doesn't get to vote. But then the next year he gets a job, $50,000 a year. So now we can, he gets to vote. But this lady, she had a profit in her business this year, so she gets to vote. Now she doesn't get to vote. You would need a massive national bureaucracy to just track whether people are paying taxes. This is like Liz Warren territory in order to implement this system. It's completely ridiculous. It would cost probably millions, billions of dollars. And for what? To try to make some claim about how you don't want people voting welfare? A lot simpler. Like I said, if you really have this issue with women voting, just don't let them vote, period. Or adopt like a dictatorship. Why would you even bother with the illusion of democracy if you're going to say, we get to cancel the election if we don't get our way? Oh, okay, so that reminds me of some people. Now that being said, there's this other question. 2011, they said Romney paid effectively 14% tax, which was on millions of dollars that he made. So here's the question. Should Willard Romney have the same vote as the middle-class Manaspherian who pays an effective rate of 20 or 25% or 30%? Yeah, but he's making millions, so it's actually more he's paying in. Right, but we're talking proportions here because a rich person, they can take advantage, they can funnel money through a foundation, they can move money offshore. They've got a lot more in the way of possibilities if they want to basically not have to deal with, essentially, if they don't want to have to pay taxes, it's a lot easier for them to do so. A middle-class person doesn't have enough money to just donate all of it to charity and then not pay on here and move it offshore. So should he get the same vote, or should Romney have half of a vote? Should the person who pays like 30% get 2 votes? You know, it gets a lot more complicated when you start thinking about it. There are rich people who don't pay any taxes. So should they still have a vote, even though they're not necessarily a net taxpayer? So a lot of different things that create problems when you start proposing these solutions. And the other thing they'll go to, a lot of these guys end up basically, they'll simp for rich people, for corporations. They'll say, yeah, the rich have the right to rule. It's like this evolutionary or economic Darwinism. They should just be in charge. Okay, now you might actually shoot yourself in the foot because women are increasingly controlling a lot of the money, especially with these billionaire divorces, which even if you say they didn't earn the money, it's going to be a big part of going forward, because if they start giving a lot of money to their daughters, you got these women inheriting like millions of dollars. It's going to change the structure of society dramatically. This is actually what happened for various reasons in ancient Sparta, and we'll probably talk about that maybe in the Black Pill book, maybe in another video. But look at that figure, 51% of personal wealth in the U.S., and it's projected to grow because of inheritance and whatnot. So if you do it just on the basis of wealth, you might actually end up being ruled by women sooner than you think. Just a suggestion. Now let's consider, what is the consequence of letting the rich men rule the society? I'm going to give you two, but there's many throughout history that can really bolster this. So in 1864, Paraguay started a war with Brazil, which was fairly petty. And this is, again, aristocratic Spanish society. Men pretty much set the agenda, the landowners allied with the Catholic Church. Women don't have a lot of social or financial influence. This conflict with Brazil is estimated to have cost the lives of around 75% of Paraguay's male population. Think about that in context for a second. Most of the men, the run-of-the-mill guys, equivalent to modern Manosphereans, were basically cannon fodder. And the result was a system where women controlled more money because there was a huge gender imbalance. Some guys lucked out. They had these harems of women because they had to repopulate the country. But it actually became more of a feminist country by direct consequence of the fact that these guys were calling all the shots, because all these dudes were wiped out. Even more direct to the point, in early 1900s, late 1800s Germany, the dominant state was Prussia. And Bismarck had warned the Kaiser. He said, these people, they are way in over their own head. They're very wealthy. They're militaristic. You've got to get them under control. Well, Bismarck was sent away, and his predictions proved to be quite accurate. But in Prussia as a state, they literally had the model that the Manosphere in many cases advocates. Your vote was on the basis of how much property you had, how much tax you paid, generally speaking, again, how wealthy you were, and they used the model to crack down on anyone who called them out in the region, and they were the driving influence behind Germany entering World War I. It's true they were part of a treaty, but they probably could have weaseled their way out of it because the whole basis for the war was kind of silly. It was an overreaction. So yes, rich people will say, we want to benefit ourselves, our industries, and if that means a bunch of young men get slaughtered, well, that's just how it is. Let's tell them it's about nationalism and patriotism. World War I, we were not meant to enter. The main reason we did is because all these rich interests were lobbying the government saying, yeah, we're going to make money off of this thing. And you could say also with Iraq in large part. Look at how much profiteering happened over the Iraq War. And yet you've got all these guys getting killed on both sides. There is a consequence to it. So it's one thing to say, okay, women shouldn't vote this way, welfare needs to be controlled for, but you might actually be creating a model that will end up destroying the lives of a lot of men when you say, oh yeah, just you guys in control. Yeah, the wealth people, the rich people in control. There are consequences, and you need to think it out so that you don't, in fact, put yourself in a worse situation than you're already in.